You spent weeks nurturing those seedlings. You hardened them off, got the soil right, staked them up, and finally, they're in the ground and growing. And then one morning you walk out to check on them, and something has clearly been eating your plants overnight. Leaves are riddled with tiny holes. A stem looks chewed. A fruit you were watching is suddenly gone. It's one of the most deflating feelings in backyard gardening. But here's the thing. It almost always comes down to a handful of culprits. Tomatoes attract a very specific cast of pests, and once you know who they are, what they look like, and what they're after, you're no longer guessing, you're acting. That's what this video is about. 6 of the most common tomato pests, how to recognize them before the damage gets out of hand, and what you can actually do about it. If you're growing tomatoes this season, stick around. And if this channel is new to you, I'm Grove, and Backyard Crops is all about practical, no-nonsense kitchen gardening. Hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one. Pest number 1, Colorado potato beetle. Let's start with a pest that catches a lot of new tomato growers off guard, because its name doesn't even mention tomatoes. The Colorado potato beetle is exactly what it sounds like, a serious threat to potato crops. But this insect has a broad palate, and tomatoes are very much on the menu. Colorado potato beetles are chunky, round beetles with bold yellow and black stripes running down their shells. They're actually quite recognizable once you know what you're looking for. They tend to show up in spring, when tomato seedlings are still young and relatively fragile, which makes early season scouting especially important. The damage starts subtly, small, irregular holes in the leaves. But left unchecked, these beetles and their larvae can strip a plant of its leaf tissue entirely. The larvae are equally destructive, plump, reddish-orange grubs that hunch along the undersides of leaves, eating with remarkable efficiency. One thing worth understanding about the Colorado potato beetle is that it's not just attracted to your tomato plants. It's drawn to the entire nightshade family. That means if you've got nightshade weeds growing in or around your garden beds, you're essentially laying out a welcome mat. Clearing those weeds out consistently is one of the most effective things you can do to reduce pressure from this pest. Companion planting with dill, alyssum, or yarrow also helps by drawing in beneficial predatory insects that prey on beetles naturally. If you're already dealing with an infestation, the most reliable first step is manual removal. Yes, it's hands-on work, but it matters. Pick off adults, larvae, and the small clusters of bright orange eggs you'll find on the undersides of leaves, then drop them into a bucket of soapy water. Insecticidal soap sprays applied directly to the foliage can help knock back populations as well. The key principle here is acting fast on that first generation, because the sooner you interrupt their reproductive cycle, the less pressure you'll deal with for the rest of the season. Pest number 2, aphids. If Colorado potato beetles are the brawlers of the tomato pest world, aphids are the quiet drain. They're tiny, barely visible as individual insects, but they gather in enormous numbers and feed collectively, sucking sap from the tender parts of your plants, the new growth, the undersides of leaves, the stems closest to the tips. The visible signs of aphid damage are easy to read once you know them. Leaves start to curl, pucker, or look distorted. The color goes from vibrant green to a washed-out yellow. Growth slows or stalls. You might also notice a sticky, shiny residue on the leaves. That's honeydew, the waste product aphids excrete as they feed. This honeydew invites a secondary problem, sooty mold, a black fungal growth that further compromises the plant's ability to photosynthesize. The good news about aphids is that they have plenty of natural enemies. Ladybugs and lacewings eat them in significant numbers, so anything you can do to make your garden hospitable to those beneficial insects will help keep aphid populations in check. Avoiding broad-spectrum pesticides that kill indiscriminately is a big part of this. Those products often wipe out the predators before they can do their job. For active infestations, the first line of attack is surprisingly simple: a strong jet of water from your hose. Aim it directly at the infested stems and undersides of leaves, and knock the aphids off physically. You'll want to do this consistently over several days, because aphids are persistent and will crawl back if given the chance. If the population is stubborn and the damage is progressing, a spray of insecticidal soap or diluted neem oil applied in the evening, when it won't burn the foliage and won't interfere with pollinators, can be very effective. The one thing to watch: if a particular stem is so heavily colonized that it's beyond saving, remove it entirely. That reduces the overall aphid load and stops them from spreading further. If you've been battling aphids this season and found something that worked, drop it in the comments. There's always something useful to learn from how other gardeners handle the same problems. Pest number 3, slugs and snails. The next group operates under cover of darkness, which is part of why they can do so much damage before you even realize they're there. Slugs and snails are nocturnal feeders, and they're especially active on warm, damp nights. They chew through leaves, tunnel into fruit, and leave behind a distinctive shiny slime trail that confirms exactly who was responsible. These two pests are closely related and behave so similarly that the strategies for dealing with them are essentially the same, so we can address them together. Both thrive in moist, sheltered conditions. Damp mulch, dense ground cover, and waterlogged soil are ideal hiding spots for them during the day. One of the most underrated preventative steps you can take is adjusting your watering schedule. If you're watering in the evening, the soil stays damp overnight, which is exactly what slugs and snails want. Switch to morning watering instead, and by nightfall the surface soil will have dried out enough to be less appealing. Pulling mulch back from the base of your tomato stems also removes the sheltered, moist zones these pests depend on during the day. For dealing with an active problem, the most reliable approach is going out at night with a headlamp and picking them off by hand. It's not glamorous, but it works. Another technique is to place damp boards or pieces of cardboard on the ground near your plants in the evening. Slugs and snails will congregate underneath by morning, making collection straightforward. Some gardeners also use shallow dishes filled with beer set at ground level, which attracts and drowns slugs effectively. Crushed eggshells or diatomaceous earth spread around the base of your plants can create a physical barrier that's uncomfortable for slugs to cross, though this needs to be refreshed after rain. Pest number 4, flea beetles. The damage from flea beetles is distinctive and a little disorienting the first time you see it. The leaves look like they've been peppered with a fine-gauge shotgun. Dozens of tiny, round holes punched right through the leaf surface, giving the whole thing a lacy, ragged appearance. This is the calling card of adult flea beetles. These are small, shiny, fast-moving insects that jump like fleas when disturbed, which is where the name comes from. They're particularly aggressive in early spring when the soil is warming up and new transplants are going in. Young tomato seedlings are the most vulnerable because they haven't had time to develop the dense foliage that allows larger plants to absorb some feeding damage without real consequence. What makes flea beetles especially complicated is that the damage isn't limited to what you can see above ground. The larvae live in the soil and feed on roots and underground stems, which can weaken a plant before you've noticed any visible leaf damage at all. This is why flea beetles disproportionately affect transplants. The combination of root feeding below and leaf feeding above is a serious stressor for a plant that's already adjusting to its new environment. Crop rotation is one of the most important long-term tools against flea beetles. If you've had them before, avoid planting tomatoes, or anything else in the nightshade family, in the same beds the following year. Flea beetles overwinter in the soil, so moving the crop deprives them of the host plant they were expecting. Keeping weeds in the nightshade family cleared out reduces the local beetle population between seasons. A thick layer of mulch over the soil surface also physically blocks emerging larvae from reaching the plant. When an infestation is in full swing and the plant is genuinely at risk, a targeted pesticide may be the right call. Use a product labeled for flea beetles specifically, and pay close attention to any pre-harvest intervals on the label. That's the number of days you need to wait between application and eating the fruit. Pest number 5, whiteflies. Whiteflies are small, moth-like insects that gather on the undersides of tomato leaves in clouds. Shake an infested plant, and they'll erupt into the air in a brief flurry before settling back down. They're most commonly a problem for gardeners growing in enclosed or semi-enclosed spaces, greenhouses, polytunnels, or even indoor grow setups, because they thrive in warm, still conditions with little airflow. That said, outdoor tomatoes in particularly sheltered, hot spots can absolutely develop whitefly problems, especially in warmer climates. And because whiteflies reproduce quickly and in large numbers, a small population can scale up surprisingly fast if conditions are right. Like aphids, whiteflies are sap-sucking insects. They weaken the plant gradually by drawing out its resources, and they also excrete honeydew, which creates the same sooty mold risk we talked about earlier. Heavily infested plants will show yellowing, stunted growth, and eventually significant decline if the problem isn't addressed. Prevention here leans heavily on air circulation and cultural management. Giving your plants adequate spacing, rather than crowding them together, allows air to move between them, which makes the warm, still microclimates whiteflies prefer less available. Avoiding excessive nitrogen fertilization is also worth noting. Plants pushed too hard with nitrogen produce a flush of soft, lush new growth that's particularly attractive to whiteflies and other soft-bodied sapsuckers. For treatment, start with a thorough wash. Use your hose to knock insects off the leaf surfaces, and make sure to target those undersides where the population congregates. Follow up with insecticidal soap, applied as often as the product label recommends. Neem oil is another option, especially for recurring problems, because it also acts as a repellent and disrupts the whitefly life cycle. Yellow sticky traps hung near affected plants can help you monitor population levels and catch adults before they settle. Pest number 6, tomato hornworm. We've saved one of the most dramatic for last. If you've ever walked out to find a tomato plant that was fully leafed out the day before, suddenly stripped bare, no warning, no gradual decline, there's a strong chance a tomato hornworm was responsible. Tomato hornworms are the larvae of hawk moths, and they are large. Fully grown, they can reach 3 to 4 inches in length, bright green with white diagonal stripes, and a distinctive horn at the rear. They are astonishingly well camouflaged. Their color and texture match the stems and foliage of tomato plants almost perfectly, which is why they're so often missed until the damage is already significant. These caterpillars eat voraciously and almost continuously, and a single hornworm can defoliate significant sections of a plant in a matter of days. They also feed on the fruit itself, gouging large, irregular chunks from the surface. The best time to scout for hornworms is either early morning or early evening, when the light is at an angle that makes it easier to see shadows and breaks in the foliage pattern. Another technique is to use a UV flashlight after dark. Hornworms glow under ultraviolet light, which makes them far easier to spot among the foliage than under ordinary conditions. Manual removal is the gold standard. Find them, pick them off, and either drop them in soapy water or relocate them well away from the garden. A word of caution though, if you spot a hornworm covered in small, white, oval-shaped protrusions along its back, leave it alone. Those are the cocoons of parasitic braconid wasps, a highly beneficial insect that will go on to parasitize more hornworms in your garden. Removing that caterpillar means removing the next generation of your best natural allies. For larger infestations where manual control isn't keeping pace, Bacillus thuringiensis, commonly sold as BT, is an effective biological insecticide that targets caterpillars specifically. It breaks down quickly in the environment, has no impact on beneficial insects, birds, or mammals, and can be applied as a foliar spray when larvae are young. It works best on smaller hornworms, so early application when you first detect feeding damage gives you the best results. General prevention principles. Before we wrap up, it's worth pulling back and looking at the bigger picture, because most of these pests respond to the same underlying principles of prevention. Healthy soil grows resilient plants, and resilient plants are genuinely better equipped to handle pest pressure without going into serious decline. That means feeding your soil with compost, maintaining good drainage, and not forcing growth with excessive synthetic fertilizers. Soft, over-fertilized growth is a magnet for sapsuckers and soft-bodied insects. Biodiversity in and around the garden matters more than many people realize. A garden that supports flowering herbs and native plants will attract predatory and parasitic insects that do pest control work for you, continuously, without any input from you at all. Dill, fennel, yarrow, alyssum, and marigolds near the tomato beds are all doing useful ecological work. Consistent observation is the single most valuable habit you can build. Walk your garden regularly. Look at the undersides of leaves, check the base of stems, watch for unusual holes or discoloration. Most of these pests are far easier to manage when you catch them early, before the population has built up and before the plant has sustained serious damage. And finally, keep records. A simple note about what pests showed up, where and when, gives you a real advantage in future seasons. Patterns emerge over time, and knowing that your left bed tends to get aphids in May, or that flea beetles arrive with the first warm spell, lets you be proactive instead of reactive. Those are 6 of the most common tomato pests you're likely to encounter. And more importantly, you now know what to look for and how to respond. The biggest takeaway is this: none of these are a death sentence for your plants. All of them are manageable, especially when you catch them early. If this was helpful, a like goes a long way toward getting this in front of other gardeners who could use it. And if you're not subscribed to Backyard Crops yet, now's a good time. We cover this kind of practical, detailed gardening content every week. Next up on the channel, how to diagnose tomato diseases from leaf symptoms, because sometimes what looks like pest damage is actually something else entirely. You won't want to miss that one.